The morning sun hit the chrome bumpers of luxury cars as David Williams pulled his old Honda into the parking lot of Elite Motors, one of the biggest dealerships in Atlanta. He sat there for a moment, looking at the gleaming showroom through his windshield. This place was his now. Well, technically it had been his since yesterday when the papers were signed. But nobody here knew that yet. David was 42 years old and had spent the last 10 years building his investment company from scratch. He'd worked 2 jobs, saved every penny, and made smart choices with his money. Now he owned a chain of successful businesses, and this dealership was his newest purchase. The previous owner had retired and moved to Florida, and David had gotten a good deal on the place. But today he wasn't here as the new owner. He'd dressed in jeans and an old jacket on purpose. He wanted to see how things really worked here, how the staff treated regular customers when the boss wasn't watching. It was something he always did with new businesses. You learn more by watching than by announcing yourself. He stepped out of his car and immediately felt eyes on him. 2 salesmen standing near the entrance glanced his way, then quickly looked somewhere else. A woman in a business suit walked past him without a word, heading straight for a white couple examining an SUV. David had seen this before. He was a black man in casual clothes driving an older car. To some people, that meant he didn't belong here. David walked into the showroom anyway. The place was impressive, he had to admit. Shiny luxury cars sat under perfect lighting, and everything smelled like leather and new carpet. Classical music played softly in the background. It was the kind of place designed to make you feel like you were entering somewhere special. A salesman approached him almost immediately. The guy was young, maybe 30, with gelled hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His name tag said Brian. "Can I help you?" Brian asked, but his tone suggested he'd rather not. "Just looking around," David said pleasantly. "Interested in seeing what you've got?" Brian's smile got tighter. "Well, these are premium vehicles. Top of the line. They're not exactly budget-friendly, if you know what I mean." David kept his cool. He'd dealt with this kind of thing before. "I understand. Still interested in looking? Maybe you'd be more comfortable at the used car lot?" Brian suggested, pointing vaguely toward the street. "They've got some nice options down there. More affordable, you know. These cars here start at $70,000. "I'm fine here, thanks," David said, walking toward a beautiful black sedan. He ran his hand along the hood, admiring the craftsmanship. He'd always loved cars, even before he could afford nice ones. Brian followed him, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, man, I don't want to waste your time or mine. These cars require serious money down." "Like serious money?" "You need excellent credit, proof of income, all that stuff." Before David could respond, a voice cut through the showroom. "Brian, is there a problem here?" David turned to see a man in his 50s walking toward them. His suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and his hair was slicked back like he thought he was in a movie. The name tag read Richard Brennan, General Manager. "No problem, Mr. Brennan," Brian said quickly. "I was just explaining our price range to this gentleman." Richard looked David up and down like he was inspecting something unpleasant. His lip actually curled a little. "I see. And have you explained to this gentleman that we cater to a specific clientele? People who are actually in the market for luxury vehicles?" David felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice calm. "I'm a customer. I have every right to look around." "A customer?" Richard laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. "A customer has money. A customer has an appointment. A customer doesn't just wander in off the street and—" He gestured at David's clothes. "Whatever that is." People were starting to stare now. Other customers stopped their conversations. Sales staff turned to watch. David could feel the heat rising in his face, but years of dealing with this kind of treatment had taught him to stay composed. "I'd like to speak to someone about your business operations," David said. Richard's face went red. "Business operations? Oh, I see what this is. You're going to complain about discrimination, right? You people always do this. You come in here, we treat you like everyone else, and suddenly it's a problem." "You people?" David repeated quietly. "Yeah, you people," Richard said louder now, playing to his audience. "People who waste our time. People who can't afford a bus pass but want to test drive a Mercedes. People who are always looking for a reason to cry discrimination and sue somebody." An older couple near the window whispered to each other. A younger salesman looked down at his shoes, clearly uncomfortable. But nobody said anything. Nobody stepped in. "I'm not wasting anyone's time," David said. "I'm looking at cars in a car dealership. That's what dealerships are for. Not this one, Richard shot back. This is Elite Motors. We have standards. We have a reputation to maintain. And frankly, you don't fit the profile of our typical customer. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're kicking me out? David said. For what? I haven't done anything wrong. You're loitering. You're disrupting my business. And if you don't leave right now, I'm calling security. Richard pulled out his phone for emphasis. I'm sure they'd be very interested in why you're really here. Probably casing the place, seeing what you can steal. That last comment drew a gasp from someone in the crowd. Even Brian looked shocked. But Richard didn't back down. He stood there, phone in hand, waiting for David to move. David looked around the showroom. He saw some people nodding in agreement with Richard. He saw others looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. He saw his own reflection in the window of a car worth more than most houses. A black man being told he didn't belong in a business he actually owned. He could reveal who he was right now. He could pull out his phone and call his lawyer. He could watch Richard's face go pale as he realized what he'd just done. But something stopped him. He wanted to see how far this would go. He wanted to know exactly what kind of place he'd bought. All right, David said quietly. I'm leaving. Smart choice, Richard said, turning to his staff with a satisfied smile. Everyone see that? That's how you handle these situations. Firm but fair. We protected our customers and our reputation. A few staff members actually nodded. Brian looked relieved. The show was over and everyone could get back to their day. David walked to the exit, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. Just before he reached the door, he turned back. Richard was already talking to another salesman, probably retelling his victory story. Mr. Brennan, David called out. Richard turned, annoyed. You're still here? Just wanted to say one thing, David said calmly. You'll be hearing from the owner very soon. Richard laughed and several staff members joined in. Sure, buddy. You go ahead and call whoever you want. The owner is a personal friend of mine. I'm sure he'll be very interested in your complaint. David just smiled and walked out. Behind him, he heard Richard telling his team they'd handled everything perfectly. That they'd done exactly what needed to be done. As David got into his old Honda and started the engine, he pulled out his phone. He had calls to make and plans to change, because Richard Brennan had no idea what was coming. And that was going to make what happened next even more interesting. That evening, David sat in his home office staring at his computer screen, but he wasn't really seeing it. His mind kept replaying what had happened at the dealership. The looks, the comments, the way Richard had talked to him like he was nothing. He'd experienced racism before, plenty of times, but something about today hit different. Maybe because it was his own business. Maybe because it happened in front of so many people who just stood there and watched. His phone buzzed. It was Linda Chen, his business attorney. She'd been handling the dealership purchase and knew he was visiting today. How'd it go? She asked when he answered. David let out a long breath. Linda, you're not going to believe this. He told her everything. Every detail, every word Richard had said. The way Brian had tried to push him toward the used car lot. How the whole staff had just watched while their manager threw him out. When he finished, there was silence on the other end of the line. David, Linda finally said, her voice tight with anger. We can sue them into next week. Discrimination, hostile environment, violation of public accommodation laws. I can have papers filed by Monday morning. I know, David said, but I want to do something else first. What do you mean? I want to know if this was just Richard being Richard, or if the whole place operates like this. Before I announce I'm the owner, I need to understand what I actually bought. Linda was quiet for a moment. You want to investigate? Exactly. The staff meeting isn't scheduled until next week anyway. Nobody knows the ownership changed hands yet. I want to use that time. All right, Linda said slowly. What do you need from me? Legal cover, documentation, everything we need if this goes south. But give me a week to see how deep this problem goes. They talked for another 30 minutes, planning out the details. By the time David hung up, he had a strategy. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. He needed to know what kind of culture existed at Elite Motors before he could fix it. The next morning, David made a call to Kevin, a young guy who worked in his investment office. Kevin was white, 28, fresh out of business school. More importantly, he was exactly the kind of person who'd get treated well at Elite Motors. Kevin, I need a favor, David said, and it's going to sound weird. An hour later, Kevin walked into Elite Motors wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt, almost identical to what David had worn the day before. David had told him to act interested but casual, not to volunteer any information about money or credit, just to see how the staff responded. David waited in his car across the street, watching through the showroom windows. The difference was immediate and obvious. Two salespeople practically ran to greet Kevin. One of them was Brian, the same guy who'd dismissed David yesterday. Through the windows, David could see them smiling, shaking hands, offering coffee. They walked Kevin around the showroom like he was a celebrity. Nobody questioned whether he could afford anything. Nobody suggested the used car lot. After about 20 minutes, Richard himself came out to meet Kevin. David watched as the manager put his arm around Kevin's shoulders like they were old friends, pointing at different cars, laughing at something Kevin said. The same man who'd threatened to call security on David was now treating Kevin like royalty. Kevin stayed for over an hour. When he finally left and got into his car, he called David immediately. "Man, that was crazy," Kevin said. "They rolled out the red carpet, offered me financing, test drives, the whole thing. Nobody asked me a single question about whether I could afford anything. Richard even gave me his personal cell number and told me to call him directly." David felt his stomach tighten. "Thanks, Kevin, I appreciate it." "David, what's going on? Why did you want me to do this?" "I'll explain later. Just send me a detailed report of everything that happened, okay?" After hanging up, David drove back to his office. He had work to do. He needed to see records, sales data, complaint files, everything the dealership had kept over the past few years. The numbers told a disturbing story. Over the last 3 years, Elite Motors had received 17 formal complaints from customers. 14 of them were from Black, Hispanic, or Asian customers describing experiences similar to what David had faced. The complaints were all filed, but none had resulted in any real consequences. There were a few notes from the previous owner telling Richard to be more careful and watch his approach, but nothing had actually changed. David dug deeper. He looked at sales records by demographic data. The dealership's customer base was overwhelmingly white, despite being located in one of Atlanta's most diverse areas. Meanwhile, 3 other dealerships nearby had much more diverse customer bases and, David noted, higher overall sales numbers. This wasn't just about discrimination being wrong, which it absolutely was. It was also bad business. Richard's attitudes and practices were literally costing the dealership money. David decided to run 2 more tests. He called Priya, an Indian woman who did consulting work for his company, and asked her to visit the dealership. Then he called Carlos, a Hispanic man from his accounting department. Both agreed to help. Priya went on Wednesday. She was treated politely but coolly. Salespeople answered her questions but didn't volunteer much information. When she asked about a specific luxury model, one salesman suggested she might want to look at something more practical instead. When she pressed about financing, she was told she'd need to bring extensive documentation to prove her income. Nobody offered her coffee. Nobody brought out Richard to charm her. Carlos went on Thursday. His experience fell somewhere in between what David and Kevin had faced. He wasn't thrown out, but he wasn't welcomed either. Salespeople seemed reluctant to spend time with him. One suggested that he might qualify for special financing programs for people in your situation, even though Carlos hadn't mentioned anything about his financial status. When he asked to test drive a car, he was told they'd need to run a credit check first. Kevin hadn't been asked for a credit check at all. By Friday, David had a complete picture. Elite Motors had a serious problem, and it started at the top with Richard. But it didn't end there. Several salespeople had clearly adopted Richard's approach, either because they believed the same things or because they'd learned it was what the boss wanted. David scheduled a meeting with his business partners and human resources consultants. He laid out everything he'd discovered. "This is worse than I thought," said Patricia, his HR consultant. She'd worked with David for years, helping him build inclusive cultures at his other businesses. "You've got documentation of systematic discrimination. It's not just one manager having a bad day. It's institutional. So what do I do?" David asked. "I don't want to fire everyone and start over. This place employs 60 people. Some of them have families, mortgages, kids in college. But I can't let this continue." Patricia nodded. "You need to make it clear that there's a new standard. Some people can change if given the chance and proper training. Others can't or won't. You need to identify which is which. Richard has to go, Linda added. No question. He's created this culture, he's been warned before, and he literally threw you out of your own business. He's a liability legally and morally. Agreed, David said. But I want to do this right. I want it to be clear why this is happening and what we're building instead. They spent the next 3 hours planning. David would reveal himself as the owner at next week's staff meeting, just as originally scheduled. But instead of a simple introduction, it would be a moment of truth. He'd tell his story, present the evidence he'd gathered, and make it clear that everything was about to change. Some people are going to be angry, Patricia warned. Some will be defensive. Some will probably quit. I know, David said, but I didn't buy this business to maintain the status quo. I bought it to make it better. That weekend, David barely slept. He kept thinking about Richard's face when he realized who David really was. He thought about Brian and the other salespeople who'd dismissed him. He thought about the customers who'd filed complaints that went nowhere. He thought about all the people who'd driven away from Elite Motors feeling small and unwanted, just like he had. Monday morning came. The staff meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. David had Linda draft the termination papers for Richard. He had Patricia prepare the new training programs. He had everything ready. As he drove toward the dealership, David felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. What he was about to do would change everything. Some people would lose their jobs. Others would have to face uncomfortable truths about themselves and their workplace. There would be anger, denial, maybe even threats. But there would also be justice. And maybe, if he did this right, there would be real change. David pulled into the parking lot at 9:45. Through the showroom windows, he could see staff members gathering for the meeting. Richard stood near the front, talking confidently with a group of salespeople. He had no idea what was about to happen. David sat in his car for a moment, taking a deep breath. Then he grabbed his briefcase and headed toward the entrance. It was time. The showroom had been transformed into a meeting space. Rows of chairs faced a small platform near the main desk. Employees filed in slowly, some looking curious, others annoyed at having their morning interrupted. There were 63 people total, from mechanics to finance managers to the sales team. Everyone was required to attend. David watched from the back office as they settled in. Richard stood near the front, straightening his tie and checking his watch. He looked completely relaxed, even excited. He'd prepared a presentation about the dealership's success under his leadership, ready to impress the new owner he'd never met. Brian sat with a group of other salespeople, joking about something. None of them had any idea what was coming. Why would they? To them, last week had been business as usual. They'd done their jobs exactly the way Richard had taught them. At exactly 10 o'clock, Linda walked onto the platform. The room quieted down. She was dressed in a sharp business suit, carrying a leather folder, looking every bit the high-powered attorney she was. "Good morning, everyone," Linda said, her voice carrying across the showroom. "My name is Linda Chen, and I'm the legal counsel for Apex Capital Holdings, the investment firm that recently acquired Elite Motors. Thank you all for being here today." Some people shifted in their seats. Ownership changes always made people nervous. Jobs could be on the line. Policies might change. The comfortable routine could disappear overnight. Apex Capital is committed to running businesses that value excellence, integrity, and respect, Linda continued. The new owner believes that success comes not just from selling premium products, but from treating every single person who walks through your doors with dignity. Now I'd like to introduce you to that owner. She gestured toward the back of the room. Please welcome David Williams. David stepped out from the office and began walking down the center aisle toward the platform. For a moment, nobody reacted. Then recognition hit like a wave moving through the crowd. Richard's face went completely white. His mouth dropped open. Brian's confident smile vanished instantly, replaced by pure panic. A few other salespeople who'd been there that day looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. The employees who hadn't witnessed the incident looked confused, glancing between David and their colleagues' shocked expressions, trying to understand what was happening. David reached the platform and stood next to Linda. He looked out at the sea of faces, taking his time, letting the moment sink in. The silence in that showroom was so complete you could hear the air conditioning humming. "Hello," David said finally, his voice calm. I'm sure some of you remember me from last week. For those who don't, let me tell you a story. He didn't rush. He started from the beginning, describing how he'd pulled into the parking lot in his old car, how he'd been dismissed and insulted, how he'd been accused of loitering and worse. He spoke about watching salespeople look past him like he was invisible, about Brian suggesting he go to the used car lot, about Richard threatening to call security and accusing him of planning to steal something. As David talked, he watched the reactions. Some people looked genuinely shocked and upset. Others looked guilty but silent. A few, mostly those who'd been part of it, just stared at the floor. The manager who treated me this way, David continued, told me I didn't fit the profile of your typical customer. He said I was wasting everyone's time. He said people like me were always looking for reasons to complain. And then he threw me out of my own business. Richard stood up suddenly, his face now red instead of white. Mr. Williams, I had no idea who you were. If I'd known... Sit down, David said quietly, but with such authority that Richard actually did. If you'd known who I was, you would have treated me differently. That's exactly the problem. Because the man you threw out last week, he was the same man standing here today. Nothing about me changed except your knowledge of my bank account. The room was absolutely silent. David could see some people nodding slightly, others looking at Richard with new eyes. Here's what happened after that day. David said. He told them about Kevin's visit, how the same salespeople who'd dismissed David had rolled out the red carpet for a white guy in the same casual clothes. He described Priya's experience being steered away from luxury models, Carlos being asked for documentation that Kevin never needed to provide. I spent last week investigating whether my experience was just one bad interaction or something bigger, David explained. He pulled out a folder and held it up. This contained 17 customer complaints from the last 3 years. 17 people who felt discriminated against here. 14 of them were people of color. All of these complaints were filed. None of them resulted in any real changes. He set the folder down and looked directly at Richard. You were warned twice. The previous owner told you to change your approach, but nothing changed because there were no consequences, and so it kept happening. Richard started to stand again, but Linda stepped forward. Mr. Brennan, I suggest you remain seated and quiet. Anything you say right now could be used in legal proceedings, David continued. I also looked at your sales data. This dealership is located in one of the most diverse areas of Atlanta, but your customer base is overwhelmingly white. Meanwhile, 3 competitors nearby have much more diverse customers and higher sales numbers. Do you know why? Nobody answered. Because they treat everyone with respect, David said simply. They understand that luxury isn't about excluding people. It's about making everyone feel valued. And when you make everyone feel valued, more people buy from you. It's not just the right thing to do morally. It's better business. He paused, letting that sink in. Then he looked at Richard again. Richard Brennan, your employment here is terminated effective immediately. You will receive your final paycheck and benefits as required by law. But you are no longer part of this company. Security will escort you to collect your belongings. Richard jumped to his feet. You can't do this. I made this place profitable. I've been here for 8 years. You're just doing this because you're vindictive, because I hurt your feelings. I'll sue you for wrongful termination. Linda opened her folder and pulled out a thick stack of papers. Mr. Brennan, these documents detail multiple policy violations, discriminatory practices, and ignored customer complaints. We have more than sufficient legal grounds for your termination. I suggest you review these with your own attorney before making any threats you can't back up. 2 security guards appeared from the side of the room. Richard looked around wildly, as if expecting someone to defend him. But nobody moved. Nobody spoke up for him. Even the salespeople who'd learned from his example stayed silent, probably realizing their own positions were now uncertain. This is ridiculous, Richard sputtered as the guards approached. You people are all going to regret this. Mark my words. Goodbye, Richard, David said calmly. As the guards escorted Richard toward his office to collect his things, David turned back to the remaining employees. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Brian, David said, looking at the young salesman who'd first approached him. You're also terminated. You participated in the discrimination, and you showed the same disrespect to other customers in your sales record. You have 1 hour to collect your belongings. Brian's face crumbled. He looked like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. He just stood up slowly and walked toward the back, his shoulders slumped. David waited until both men were gone before speaking again. "I want to be very clear about something," he said to the remaining staff. "I'm not here to fire everyone and start over. This dealership has good people who care about their work and their customers, but we're going to do things differently now." He saw some people relax slightly, though most still looked nervous. "I believe in second chances," David continued. "I believe people can learn and grow and change their behavior. But I also believe in accountability. If you've treated customers the way I was treated, if you've looked past people because of how they look or what they drive or what they're wearing, you have a choice to make right now. You can change or you can leave." A woman in the third row raised her hand hesitantly. Her name tag read Helen. David nodded at her. "Mr. Williams, I want to apologize," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I was here that day. I saw what happened to you. And I didn't say anything. I should have, but I didn't, and I'm sorry." David looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you for saying that, Helen. And you're right, you should have spoken up. But I understand it's hard to stand against your boss, especially when you need your job. What matters now is what you do going forward." He addressed the whole room again. "That goes for all of you. What happened before today is done. What matters now is how we move forward together. And I have someone here who's going to help us do exactly that." David gestured to a woman standing near the side entrance. She walked onto the platform with confidence, a warm smile on her face. "This is Patricia Rodriguez," David said. "She's an expert in building inclusive, high-performing teams. Starting today, she's your new general manager, and she's going to work with all of you to transform this dealership into a place where everyone, customers and employees, feels respected and valued." Patricia stepped forward. "Good morning, everyone. I know today has been shocking and uncomfortable. Change is never easy, especially when it comes like this. But I'm excited to work with you, because I believe in what we can build here together." David looked out at the faces in front of him one more time. Some looked relieved. Some looked worried. Some looked genuinely eager for change. And some, he knew, were already planning their exit. That was okay. Not everyone could make this journey. But the ones who stayed, the ones who really committed to change, they would build something better, something worth being proud of. After the meeting ended, employees filtered out slowly, talking in hushed voices. Some looked shell-shocked. Others seemed relieved, like a weight had been lifted. David watched them go, wondering which ones would still be here in a month. Patricia pulled him aside as the showroom cleared out. "That took guts," she said quietly. "Most owners would have just fired everyone and started fresh." "That's the easy way," David replied. "But these people have families, bills, lives. I want to give them a chance to be better." "Some of them won't take it," Patricia warned. "I know, but I have to try." Over the next few days, 3 more salespeople quit. They didn't give dramatic exits or explanations. They just turned in their resignations and left. David figured they saw the writing on the wall and decided to move on before things got harder for them. He didn't try to stop them, but most of the staff stayed, and that's when the real work began. Patricia started with mandatory training sessions. Every employee had to attend, from the mechanics in the back to the finance people in their offices. The sessions covered unconscious bias, customer service standards, and what discrimination actually looked like in daily interactions. Some people engaged genuinely. Helen, the woman who'd apologized during the meeting, took notes and asked thoughtful questions. She admitted she'd made assumptions about customers based on appearances and wanted to do better. Others sat with their arms crossed, clearly just waiting for it to be over. A salesman named Todd kept checking his phone and sighing loudly. When Patricia asked him a direct question about how he'd handle a scenario, he gave a sarcastic answer that made the room uncomfortable. After the session, Patricia pulled Todd aside. David watched through the glass office walls as they talked. He couldn't hear the words, but he could read body language. Todd was defensive, gesturing angrily. Patricia remained calm but firm. Finally, Todd threw up his hands and walked out. Patricia came to find David an hour later. "Todd's gone, he quit. Said he wasn't going to be lectured about how to do his job by someone who just got here." David nodded slowly. "Can't save everyone." "No," Patricia agreed. "But you can save the ones who want to be saved." The real test came a week later. David was in his office reviewing reports when he heard a commotion in the showroom. He looked up to see a young black couple being greeted by Helen. They were dressed casually, and they had a toddler with them in a stroller. David's heart rate picked up. This was it, the first real moment to see if anything had actually changed. He walked out quietly and positioned himself where he could observe without being obvious. Helen smiled warmly at the couple, immediately offering to get them some water and asking if the little girl needed anything. The woman looked surprised but pleased. "We're just looking today," the man said, a slight edge of defensiveness in his voice, like he was bracing for rejection. "That's perfectly fine," Helen said genuinely. "Take all the time you need. Is there a particular type of vehicle you're interested in? Or would you like me to show you around?" David watched as Helen spent the next 40 minutes with the couple. She didn't rush them. She didn't make assumptions. She showed them several cars, answered their questions patiently, and when they said they needed to think about it, she simply gave them her card and invited them back any time. As the couple left, the woman turned back. "Thank you," she said to Helen. "This was actually pleasant. We went to 2 other dealerships this week and they both treated us like we were wasting their time." Helen's face showed genuine emotion. "That shouldn't have happened to you. I hope you'll come back and see us when you're ready." After they left, David approached Helen. She saw him coming and looked nervous, probably worried she'd done something wrong. "That was excellent," David said simply. "That's exactly what I want to see here." Helen's shoulders relaxed. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how I stayed silent when I should have spoken up. Those people, that couple, they reminded me of why it matters. Everyone deserves to feel welcome." David felt something shift in his chest. Hope, maybe? Real hope that this could actually work. But not every interaction went smoothly. A few days later, Carlos from David's accounting team called him. He'd visited the dealership again, this time as an actual customer ready to buy. "One of your salespeople, guy named Jeff. He was okay at first," Carlos said. "But then he started making these comments about special financing programs for minorities. He kept emphasizing it like I couldn't qualify for regular financing. When I told him I was paying cash, he looked shocked, like he couldn't believe it." David felt his jaw tighten. "Thanks for telling me. I'll handle it." He called Jeff into his office that afternoon. The salesman was in his 40s, been with the company for 5 years. He came in looking confused. "Jeff, I want to talk to you about a customer interaction from yesterday," David said. Jeff's confusion deepened. "Okay, which one?" David described what Carlos had told him. As he talked, Jeff's expression changed from confusion to defensiveness. "I was just trying to be helpful," Jeff protested. "There are programs specifically for minority buyers. I thought I was doing him a favor by mentioning them." "Did he ask about special programs?" David asked. "Well, no, but did he give you any indication he needed help with financing?" "No, but a lot of people don't know about these programs and—" "Jeff," David interrupted. "You made an assumption about him based on his ethnicity. You assumed he'd need special help. That's exactly what we talked about in training." Jeff's face reddened. "That's not fair. I'm trying to follow the rules here. If I don't mention programs and someone finds out about them later, they could complain I didn't tell them. If I do mention them, apparently I'm discriminating. I can't win." David leaned back in his chair. "Here's what you do. You treat every customer the same. You ask everyone the same questions. You make the same offers to everyone. When someone tells you they're paying cash, you believe them and move forward. You don't act surprised. You don't make assumptions. It's not complicated, Jeff, but what if? No what ifs. Just treat people equally. Can you do that?" Jeff was quiet for a long moment. "I can try. That's all I'm asking. Try. Really try." After Jeff left, Patricia came in. She'd been listening from the outer office. "He's borderline," she said. "Could go either way." "I know," David replied. "But he said he'd try." That's more than Richard or Brian ever did. The transformation wasn't just about fixing problem employees. It was also about changing systems. David and Patricia overhauled the entire customer service approach. They created new protocols that removed opportunities for bias. Every customer got greeted within 2 minutes. Every customer got offered the same amenities. Every customer got shown the same financing options. They also changed how success was measured. Sales numbers still mattered, But so did customer satisfaction scores, and those scores were tracked across all demographics. If a salesperson had great numbers with white customers but poor scores with everyone else, that was a problem. David reached out personally to every customer who'd filed a complaint over the past 3 years. Many were surprised to hear from the new owner. He apologized for their experiences and invited them to give Elite Motors another chance. Some said no, the hurt was too deep, but several agreed to come back. One woman named Grace came in on a Saturday. She'd filed a complaint 2 years ago about being ignored while salespeople helped white customers who'd arrived after her. Helen ended up working with her, and by the end, Grace bought a car. Before she left, Grace found David. "I never thought I'd come back here," she said. "But I can see things are different. I hope it lasts." "Me too," David said honestly. Not everyone was happy about the changes. David started getting anonymous emails criticizing the political correctness and complaining that good salespeople were being punished for doing their jobs. One message said he was destroying the dealership's reputation and that sales would plummet. But something interesting happened. After the initial dip during the transition, sales started climbing. The dealership was reaching new customers, people who'd driven past for years assuming they wouldn't be welcome. Word spread through Atlanta's diverse communities that Elite Motors was under new ownership, with a new attitude. Local news picked up the story. A reporter came to interview David about his experience and the changes he'd made. The piece aired during prime time, showing David talking about discrimination in business and how inclusion was actually good for profit margins. The story went viral online. People shared it, commented on it, debated it. Some praised David for his actions. Others criticized him, saying he was being too harsh or that he was making it about race when it was really about business. Through it all, David kept focused on the work, because at the end of the day, it wasn't about being famous or proving a point. It was about building something better. One evening, about 2 months after that first staff meeting, David was locking up when Helen approached him. "Mr. Williams, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "When you first revealed who you were and what had happened, I was terrified. I thought I'd lose my job. I've got a mortgage and 2 kids in school. I couldn't afford to start over." She paused. "But I'm glad you gave me a chance. This job means something now. I'm proud to come to work. I actually look forward to meeting customers because I know I'm treating them right." David smiled. "That's all I wanted, Helen. People who were proud of what they do and how they do it." As he drove home that night, David thought about how far they'd come and how far they still had to go. Change was never finished. It was something you had to keep working at every single day. But they were on the right path. And that was enough. 6 months after David had walked out of his own dealership, Elite Motors looked completely different. Not just physically, though the showroom did have new marketing material showing customers of all backgrounds. The real change was in the feeling of the place. You could sense it the moment you walked through the doors. David stood by the window one Tuesday morning watching the parking lot fill up. A Hispanic family pulled in with their teenage son. An elderly Asian couple parked near the entrance. A young black woman in business attire stepped out of an older sedan. All of them walked in with purpose, without hesitation. That would have been unusual 6 months ago. Now it was becoming normal. Patricia walked up beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one. "Sales numbers came in," she said. "And? Up 22% from this time last year. Customer satisfaction scores are the highest they've been in the dealership's history." David took a sip of coffee, letting that sink in. "The people who said we'd fail, that being inclusive would hurt business, what do they say now?" Patricia smiled. "They're very quiet these days. It hadn't been easy getting here. After those first 2 months, they'd hit a rough patch. Some longtime customers had complained about the changes, saying the dealership had lost its exclusive feel. One even said he preferred when it was classier, which wasn't hard to decode." David had written him back personally, thanking him for his past business and wishing him well at other dealerships. But for every customer they lost, they gained 3 more. Families who'd never considered Elite Motors before started coming in. Young professionals, immigrant families saving up for their first luxury car, established professionals who'd been going to competitors because they felt more welcome there. The word of mouth was powerful. People told their friends, their co-workers, their church members, "There's this dealership in Atlanta," they'd say, where they actually treat you like a human being, where nobody judges you for what you're wearing or what you drove up in. David's phone buzzed. It was a text from Kevin, his colleague who'd done that first test visit. Just saw your dealership featured in Business Journal. Article about inclusive practices boosting profits. You're famous, man. David smiled but didn't respond. He wasn't doing this for fame or recognition. He was doing it because it was right. The fact that it also made good business sense was just a bonus. Helen appeared in the showroom, greeting the Hispanic family. David watched as she knelt down to talk to the teenage boy, asking him what features he cared about in a car. The kid's face lit up, probably not used to adults taking his opinion seriously. His parents relaxed visibly. That was Helen's gift now. She'd become one of the top salespeople. Not through aggressive tactics, but through genuine connection. She made people feel seen and heard. Last month, she'd outsold everyone else on the team. And 3 of her customers had written personal thank you notes to management. Jeff, the salesman who'd made assumptions about Carlos, walked past David's office. He'd improved, but slowly. He still made occasional missteps, but he caught himself more often now. He'd apologized to customers when he realized he'd been presumptuous. That willingness to admit mistakes and correct them was what David valued most. Not everyone had made it, though. Besides the ones who'd quit early, 2 more salespeople had been let go for refusing to change their approach. One had been caught on camera making dismissive comments about a customer's accent. The other had continued steering minority customers toward cheaper models despite repeated warnings. David hadn't enjoyed those terminations, but they'd been necessary. You couldn't build a new culture while tolerating people actively working against it. The phone rang. It was Linda, his attorney. David, remember Richard Brennan? Hard to forget. He tried to sue for wrongful termination. His lawyer just withdrew the case. Apparently, when they reviewed all the documentation we provided, they advised him he had no chance of winning. David felt no satisfaction from that news. Richard's career in the automotive industry was effectively over. Word had spread about why he'd been fired, and no dealership wanted to touch him. That wasn't revenge, it was consequence. What about Brian? David asked. Last I heard, he moved to another state and got out of car sales entirely, working in insurance now. After hanging up, David thought about Richard and Brian. Part of him wondered if they'd learned anything, if they understood why what they'd done was wrong. Or did they just feel victimized, convinced they'd been treated unfairly? He'd never know. And honestly, it didn't matter. His job wasn't to change them. It was to build something better for everyone else. Patricia poked her head into his office. Got a minute? Someone here to see you. In the lobby stood Grace, the woman who'd filed a complaint 2 years ago and then returned to buy a car. She had a younger woman with her. Mr. Williams, this is my daughter Nicole, Grace said. She just graduated college and got her first real job. She needs a car, Nicole smiled shyly. Mom kept telling me about how different this place is now. I wanted to see for myself. David shook her hand. Welcome to Elite Motors. Helen will take great care of you. As Helen led Nicole toward the showroom, Grace pulled David aside. You know what the biggest change is? She said quietly. It's not just that people are nicer. It's that my daughter didn't feel nervous walking in here. She didn't have to steel herself for disrespect or prepare comebacks for dismissive comments. She just walked in like any other customer, expecting to be treated well. That's what you've given people. The ability to shop without armor. Those words stayed with David the rest of the day. Shopping without armor. That's what equality actually looked like in practice. That evening, David attended a community event at a local church. He'd been invited to speak about business ethics and inclusion. The room was full of small business owners, young entrepreneurs, and community leaders. He told his story. From walking into his own dealership and being thrown out, to the investigation, to the confrontation, to the long process of change. He didn't sugarcoat the difficulties or pretend it had been easy. Some people think inclusion is about being nice or politically correct, David said. It's not. It's about recognizing that everyone has value, and everyone's money spends the same. When you treat people with dignity, they come back. They tell their friends. Your reputation improves. Your business grows. This isn't charity. It's smart business. During the Q&A, a young black woman raised her hand. Mr. Williams, do you ever regret not just announcing yourself as the owner that first day? You could have avoided the whole humiliating experience. David thought about that. Sometimes, he admitted. It hurt to be treated that way. It made me angry. But if I'd announced myself immediately, I wouldn't have known how deep the problem went. I wouldn't have seen that it wasn't just Richard, it was a whole culture that needed changing. Sometimes you have to go through the hard thing to understand what really needs fixing. After the event, several people approached him. One man owned a restaurant and wanted advice on training his staff. A woman ran a real estate office and was dealing with similar issues. They swapped contact information, promising to stay in touch. On his way home, David stopped by the dealership. It was closed. The showroom dark except for security lights illuminating the cars inside. He stood outside for a moment, remembering the first time he'd parked here 6 months ago. How he'd felt dismissed, disrespected, humiliated. Now when he looked at this building, he felt something different. Pride. Not pride in owning it, but pride in what it was becoming. A place where people were judged by their interest in buying a car, not by their skin color or their clothes or their assumptions about their bank account. His phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Tomorrow morning we're getting visited by 3 business students writing a case study on our transformation. Just FYI, David smiled. Elite Motors was becoming an example, a model for how businesses could change. That meant more than any sales record or profit margin. As he drove home, David thought about the journey that had brought him here. From those early years working 2 jobs and saving every dollar, to building his investment company, to buying businesses and trying to run them with integrity. It had all led to this moment, this place, this purpose. He thought about the teenage boy in the showroom today, lighting up when Helen asked his opinion. About Nicole shopping without armor, about Helen finding pride in her work, about customers who'd been hurt before finding the courage to try again. This was what success really looked like. Not just profit margins and sales figures, though those mattered, but people feeling valued, people feeling welcome, people getting the respect they deserved. David's phone rang. It was his mother. "Saw your interview on the news tonight," she said. "I'm proud of you, baby." "Thanks, Mom. Your father would have been proud too. You know, he faced stuff like that his whole life, working in retail. People always assumed he couldn't afford the things he was selling." "I remember," David said quietly. "You didn't just change a business," his mother continued. "You changed the experience for everyone who walks through those doors. That matters. That really matters." After they hung up, David sat in his driveway for a moment before going inside. His mother was right. This wasn't about revenge on Richard or proving a point to Brian. It was about making sure the next person, and the person after that, and the person after that, would be treated with the dignity every human being deserved. The dealership manager who kicked him out had no idea he was the new owner. But in the end, that wasn't the important part of the story. The important part was what came after. The hard work of change, the commitment to do better, the belief that business success and human decency weren't opposing forces but partners in building something that lasted. David got out of his car and headed inside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that doing the right thing was also the smart thing, and he was ready for it.